The first reforms to the Canadian Citizenship Act in more than a generation aim to tighten rules for those looking to become Canadian citizens, while also cracking down on immigration fraud. While critics agree with punishing those who take advantage of the Canadian system, some are concerned the crackdown could unintentionally penalize all new immigrants. How necessary are these reforms, and how much clarity do they bring to the requirements of Canadian citizenship? And joining us this evening, Eric Appman, Executive Director of the Edmonton Mennonite Centre for Newcomers. As well tonight, Raj Sharma, an immigration lawyer with the Calgary firm Stuart Sharma Harshani. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime.
Thank you.
Raj, I'd like to start with you. These are being touted as sweeping changes. How necessary an overhaul of this degree is this?
I think the changes are, in fact, necessary, Michael. I mean, what we had before was this sort of vague requirement that individuals live in Canada for 3 years out of the 4 years preceding the application. It doesn't actually specify whether living in Canada means 2 feet on the ground in Canada. So the new changes stipulate 2 feet on the ground physical residency in Canada for 4 years out of the 6 years preceding the application. So I think that that's a welcome clarity to the state of affairs.
Eric, speaking of clarity, how much clarity does this bring for you in terms of requirements for Canadian citizenship?
Yeah, I would echo what Raj has said. There was a lot of ambiguity, and now it's very clear. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult to attain citizenship, but it's clear what it takes. Check these various boxes, and citizenship.
Is there an element in particular that you see as being clearer than what exists currently?
I think the residency, the number of years, and what constitutes a year. For example, students, it's really clear how long you need to be here under what circumstances. So I think that's much more direct.
Raj, the proposed changes also include a broader range of requirements around language and knowledge, which you feel are maybe unnecessary. Why is that?
Well, I was on Alberta Primetime 2 years ago debating or discussing this with Deepak Oberoi. At that time, the Conservatives had brought in a separate language test that was necessary along with the application. So, I characterize the changes to the citizenship laws as the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is, of course, a clear requirement, 2 feet on the ground in Canada for 4 years out of 6. What I feel is superfluous are these language requirements. The fact of the matter is that the written knowledge test already tests applicants at the requisite Canadian language benchmark. So I think that's unnecessary. You have language testing, of course, now between 14 years of age and 64 years of age. And I question whether requiring a 14-year-old who's already in the country for 4 to 6 years, who's already statutorily required to be in English or French instruction in terms of school, why that individual would have to provide separate language testing. And finally, I guess my third and fourth bone of contention is that the vast majority of immigrants to Canada who are economic immigrants already pass a language test to come to Canada. So I think requiring another language test is unnecessary and superfluous. And finally, I suppose that one has to question whether a certain proficiency of English is necessary for an individual to partake in Canadian society, which of course is to vote. So I think what happens is that with these changes, you're going to see a preference for, it's an Anglophilic sort of preference. And so you are going to exclude individuals, especially older immigrants that have come here late in life, and may not be able to develop that level of language proficiency necessary to pass an exam, but of course are full members, participating members of the Canadian fabric.
Eric, where do you stand on these changing standards around language and knowledge?
On the surface, I don't really have an issue with it. I think language is important to integration into the community. If you can't speak to your neighbor, how can you be an effective neighbor? How can you be a strong citizen. What I do think needs to happen is that there are supports to ensure that people have every opportunity to learn the language. And in cases where exemptions need to be made, I think we need to ensure that they can be made. If you have, this morning I was talking to a father of 3 who is going to struggle with language because he's the breadwinner. He's not going to have opportunities to learn English or take classes, so it's going to be a challenge for him. And I think that's potentially a great citizen that we may miss if we stick too rigidly to some of those.
So that support is not there right now?
But we are going to miss that individual as a citizen, because the Conservatives have removed all subjectivity and all discretion from the citizen decision-making process. Citizenship judges in the past were able to overcome these type of technical deficiencies with applications. Citizenship judges now, under the new proposed changes, are ceremonial figures only. So we are going to lose that prospective great citizen.
In the short term, yeah, that's going to be an issue, but this is a reform, and if the reform stops at draft 1, we're in a lot of trouble, because issues are going to emerge for any of these changes. So as we identify an issue or we start missing those citizens, I think then we need to make another reform. So if this is the end of the line, then yes, that's definitely a mistake, but there should be opportunity to continue to adjust and dabble with policy.
So Eric, are you saying then the support is not there?
No, I believe the supports are there. I think not everybody's going to have the opportunity. You're going to have older permanent residents who have been here for a very long period of time, who haven't taken those classes. And as you get older, we know it's much more difficult to pick up a second language. So as we identify groups that make great citizens that are falling through the cracks, I would hope that adjustments can be made, that we'll see changes.
Now, Raj, there are some hefty consequences when it comes to the element of immigration fraud. Fines up to a maximum of $100,000 and/or 5 years in jail, and that's up from what, $1,000 and maybe and/or 1 year in jail. What do you make of that?
Well, look, no one wants to see Canadian hospitality and generosity abused by anyone. But the fact of the matter is the devil's in the details in terms of enforcement. So the problem is that there simply weren't enough charges even under the old system, in my opinion. The fact of the matter is that immigration fraud was rampant, and you did see ghost consultants and unregulated consultants counsel individuals to embellish or exaggerate the time in Canada. Let's face it, the Canadian passport is a incredibly valuable commodity, and individuals are willing to lie, cheat, and deceive us to obtain that benefit.
Eric, you see some unintended consequences, though, do you not, when it comes to immigration fraud and hefty repercussions?
I worry sometimes that we start developing a system that's meant to catch people as opposed to identify great citizens or great future citizens. And when you create a structure, you can lose focus of what you're actually trying to do, which is continue to build a country through immigration. And if you design a system that's meant to catch people, you start discouraging people who you want to become citizens, because they become fearful, or the rules get so difficult or so rigorous or so concerning that you scare people off. And I think that would be one of the potential worries that reform might have.
Go ahead, Raj.
That's not a potential worry, Michael. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Immigration Refugee Protection Act is enforcement legislation. If you look at everything that this government has done over the last couple of years, there's no identifying, great contributors to the Canadian multicultural fabric. This is enforcement-minded legislation, and the fact that the minister can unilaterally make a decision to strip an individual of their citizenship based on fraud or deception, that can only lead to one conclusion, which is this legislation strengthens the minister's hand in dealing with individuals that have misrepresented or embellished or exaggerated their time in Canada.
Raj, where else would revoking citizenship come into effect? Because that's a pretty key element for you, is it not?
Yeah, and I guess this, if I were to boil down the legislation into the good, the bad, the ugly, now we're moving into the ugly part of the legislation, which is the minister, number one, can designate or appoint or grant citizenship secretly to any individual I think that that's a little bit strange and that's a little bit odd, and I think that that should be open or at least public and transparent when we decide to grant citizenship to an individual that may or may not meet the requirements of citizenship. So I think that that's a little bit strange. Number two, the minister can revoke citizenship unilaterally and on his own when there's evidence of fraud or deception. And of course, apparently that decision can be reviewed at the federal court. But again, the devil's in the details. And finally, you have this sort of the bill that kind of started it all, which was a bill proposed by a backbench MP here in Northeast Calgary, which was revoking the citizenship of dual nationals that commit acts of terror or acts against the Canadian forces. And so that is very, very interesting. But I kind of dismiss it because I think that that is, in essence, sound and fury and symbolic pandering to the Conservatives' base. I don't see a lot of citizenship revocations on the basis of terrorism and treason.
Eric, do you see that as pandering as well?
Pandering might be a little strong, but I do think it's an odd piece to put in there. We're highlighting changes to immigration reform, and one of the highlights that's in there is we're trying to catch bad guys, and I think it gives the Canadians the perception that there are a lot of cheaters and there are a lot of potential terrorists that we need to be concerned about. So I think that's another unintended consequence, that we're kind of broadcasting to the public that we've got bad guys out there and potentially painting all immigrants or a population with that brush.
And should the minister have this degree of power?
I would struggle to say that that's you want to have one person being able to kind of make these incredibly strong decisions when they've got to run a whole ministry. So you'd hope that there was more transparent systems to say, okay, if this is going to happen, these are the steps that are going to be taken. It won't be behind closed doors. It won't be by one person who reads a memo. So I would hope that, again, these things become identified and are adapted and changed.
Eric, overall, are these the changes that point in the right direction for reforming immigration in Canada?
I think it had to happen. I mean, this is long overdue that changes needed to happen. I think there's a focus now on economic immigrants, and I think that's going to present some challenges because we as a country, I think, don't just want a strong economy. We want a great nation, and I think we're leaning a little far to one side as opposed to building a nation. We're focusing on building an economy.
Raj, you have the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is this the right direction we're headed?
You know what? I agree with the requiring individuals to spend more time in Canada. I think there's only one way to become a Canadian, and that's to spend a significant amount of time in this country. In terms of Eric's comments about hope, I hope that the Conservatives don't push it too far as well, but hope and prayer isn't enough. We need institutional safeguards against the untrammeled discretion of one individual. Great
to speak with you both. Thank you for your time this evening. Eric Ampman is Executive Director of the Edmonton Mennonite Centre for Newcomers, and Raj Sharma, an immigration lawyer with Stewart, Sharma, Harshani.